The countdown reached 0 and the blade came down before I could look away. My name is Vesic, and I served as third voice of the Calyx Concord, a council seat that gave me access to every major broadcast in known space. That morning I sat in the observation gallery of Station Merid, with my hands locked together so tightly my knuckles ached, watching General Elena Voss kneel on a platform built by the Thren Assembly. She did not plead. She did not look afraid. She looked into the camera, straight through it, straight at every screen in every home across 1,000 worlds, and she said one sentence that would echo through the rest of my life. "You have no idea what you are cutting loose." Then the platform did its work, and the broadcast cut to static, and for exactly 40 seconds nobody in that gallery said a single word. I want you to understand what came before that moment, because without it, nothing that happened after will make sense. 900 years earlier, humanity had arrived in galactic space as the newest and smallest player at the table. The Thren Assembly, older and stronger, and far more practiced at diplomacy, offered them a treaty called the Cordon Accords. On paper, it was peace. In practice, it was a leash. Humanity agreed to limit their fleet technology, cap their artificial intelligence, and accept Thren oversight of their expansion routes. In exchange, they were allowed to exist among the stars without being crushed by species who had been building warships since before human civilization learned to write. For 9 centuries that leash held. Historians on 100 different worlds wrote about human patience as though it were a personality trait, a quirk of their species, proof that they had matured into peaceful galactic citizens. I believed that story too. Everyone did. General Voss was the reason it held. For 30 years she served as the senior human liaison to the Concord Council, and in that role she absorbed every insult, every violation, every slow theft of territory the Thren attempted, and turned each one into another quiet negotiation instead of a spark. She was patient in a way that made the rest of us comfortable. We mistook her patience for weakness, and we mistook 900 years of restraint for 900 years of limitation. The Thren Assembly grew tired of a negotiator who kept outmaneuvering them through legal means, so they built a case against her. They accused her of sabotaging a joint research vessel, using evidence that later investigations proved had been assembled by the very officials who wanted her removed. The trial lasted 4 days. The verdict surprised no one who had studied the pattern, and yet somehow it seemed to surprise everyone, including me. 41 hours after her execution, I received a private message from a human officer named Daniel Ashworth, who had served for years as a logistics liaison to my station. We used to share drinks on quiet nights, back when the station still felt quiet. His message contained no greeting. It read simply, "Leave the observation deck now, and do not board any vessel bound for Thren space." I did not understand the warning until I turned on the emergency channel and watched Human Fleet Command issue an order unlike anything recorded in 900 years of treaty history. They did not declare war. War, as a word, implied 2 sides negotiating for advantage. What humanity did instead was simpler and far more frightening. Every ship operating under Cordon Accord restrictions dropped those restrictions within the same hour, as though a single switch had been thrown across their entire civilization. I later learned the truth from Daniel himself. Weeks after everything changed, humanity had never actually stopped developing beyond the treaty limits. They had built exactly what the treaty allowed on the surface, filed every report the Concord demanded, passed every inspection with practiced calm, and quietly continued advancing behind sealed doors that no inspector ever thought to question. Fleet doctrines labeled as theoretical research had been fully operational for decades. Artificial intelligence cores that appeared throttled to Concord-approved limits had, in truth, been operating at a fraction of their real capacity the entire time. Waiting. Waiting for what, I asked him once the chaos had settled. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Waiting for the day the leash broke on its own, he said. We hoped that day would never come. We prepared for it anyway. The first strike happened at Perimeter Station Call, a Thren stronghold considered nearly unbreakable, guarded by 300 vessels and defense grids reinforced over 2 centuries. I watched the sensor logs later, replayed dozens of times by analysts who could not quite believe what they were seeing. It was not a battle in any sense that word usually carries. A battle suggests 2 forces testing each other, trading advantage back and forth until one side breaks. This was something else entirely. It was the sudden release of pressure that had been building against a locked door for 900 years, and when that door finally opened, everything behind it moved exactly as fast and as far as it had been straining to move the whole time. Within 2 hours, the Thren presence at Call no longer functioned as a coordinated force. Human ships did not linger. They did not pursue stragglers or make a public spectacle of the outcome. They simply moved on to the next objective with the calm efficiency of people executing a plan they had rehearsed 1,000 times in simulation. Because they had. News of Call spread through Concord space faster than any official channel could manage it, faster even than my own council could hold an emergency session. Every species who had quietly supported the Cordon Accords, who had benefited from keeping humanity contained and compliant, suddenly found themselves asking the same question in different languages. If humanity had been holding back this much power for 9 centuries, what exactly had we been managing all this time? I reached out to Daniel again, 3 days after Call, expecting silence, or perhaps a message telling me to stop contacting human channels altogether. Instead, he answered almost immediately, his voice steady but tired in a way I had never heard from him before. "We are not angry at your people specifically, Vesic," he said. "Most of the Concord species had no idea what the Accords actually were. You inherited a system built before you had any say in it. But the Thren spent 900 years testing exactly how far they could push before something broke, and General Voss was the only reason it never did. They removed the one person holding the door shut, and then acted shocked when everything behind it came through at once." I asked him whether this meant permanent conflict between our peoples. He paused long enough that I thought the connection had failed. "No," he finally said. "It means a fair peace now, negotiated between equals, or no peace at all. We tried the other kind in good faith for 900 years. We do not intend to try it twice." 3 weeks after the execution, a Thren delegation arrived in human space carrying formal terms of surrender, though their official documents avoided that word and used softer language instead. I was invited to observe the proceedings as part of a neutral council presence, a role that felt strange to hold after everything I had witnessed. The delegation was led by an official named Corvin Als, a name I remember clearly because of how much it trembled when he spoke. The human delegation was led by a woman named Grace Whitmore, newly appointed to the position General Voss had once held, though nobody expected her to fill that role in quite the same way. She was younger, sharper in her manner, and carried none of the practiced patience her predecessor had shown for 30 years. When Corvin also opened the meeting with a lengthy apology filled with careful diplomatic phrasing, she cut him off before he reached his second sentence. "We are not here for apologies," she said. "We are here for terms that reflect what actually happened, not terms that let your assembly pretend it still holds the advantage." I watched the Thren delegation exchange glances, the kind of glance species make when they realize the negotiation they prepared for no longer applies to the situation in front of them. For 900 years, every human representative at that table had approached negotiations from a position of managed weakness. Grace Whitmore approached it from a position of demonstrated strength, and the difference in the room was immediate and impossible to ignore. The terms she presented were not designed for revenge. I want to be clear about that, because many outside observers assumed humanity would use their sudden advantage to punish the Thren for centuries of quiet exploitation. Instead, the terms asked for something simpler and, in some ways, more unsettling to the old order: full removal of the Cordon Accords. Equal standing on the Concord Council, with human votes carrying the same weight as any founding species. Independent oversight of any future treaty, conducted by a rotating panel rather than a single dominant power. And a formal, recorded acknowledgement that the execution of General Voss had been based on manufactured evidence, entered permanently into Concord historical record, so no future generation could rewrite what had happened. Corvin Als argued weakly against several points, particularly the historical record clause, insisting it would damage relations between species for generations. Grace Whitmore listened to his objection without interrupting, then responded with a calm that somehow felt more dangerous than anger would have. "Relations between our species were already damaged the moment you decided a fair negotiator was more dangerous than an unfair war," she said. "We are offering you a chance to rebuild something honest. That offer will not remain available indefinitely." The delegation signed within the hour. I returned to my station after the proceedings expecting a sense of relief, the kind that usually follows the end of any prolonged conflict. Instead, I found myself replaying the entire 9 months since the execution, searching for the moment I should have understood sooner what was actually happening around me. I thought back to conversations with Daniel over the years, small comments I had dismissed as exaggeration or cultural quirk, comments that in hindsight had been quiet warnings the entire time. I remember one evening in particular, years before any of this began, when Daniel and I shared a drink on the observation deck during a quiet rotation. He had said something that stuck with me without my understanding why. "You people think the Accords are a cage we agreed to live inside," he said. "They are a cage we agreed to build around ourselves, because we did the math on what we would do without one." I had laughed it off at the time. Humans exaggerate, I told myself. It is a charming trait of a young species still finding its place among older ones. I did not consider, not even once, that he might have been stating a fact rather than making a joke. After the treaty terms were signed, I asked to meet Daniel in person for the first time in years, traveling to a human relay station near the new demilitarized boundary the Concord Council had established. He looked older than I remembered, though only a few years had passed. War, even one this short and this decisive, seems to age people faster than time alone ever could. I asked him the question that had been sitting in my mind since the broadcast ended in static on that first terrible day. Did you know this would happen? Did your people know, before it happened, exactly what would follow her execution? He considered the question carefully before answering, the way he always did when something mattered to him. We hoped it would never come to this, he said. General Voss spent 30 years making sure it never would. But every military planner in human command understood that if the Thren ever grew impatient enough to remove her by force, there would be nothing left holding the treaty together on our side either. We built our contingency plans the same year we signed the original accords. We simply hoped, every single year after that we would never need to use them. I asked him what happened to the officials who had originally proposed those contingency plans, curious whether such preparation had been controversial within human command at the time. Most of them are retired now, he said. A few passed on before any of this happened, but every commanding officer since then inherited the same plans and the same instructions. Maintain patience as long as patience serves the peace. The moment it stops serving the peace, stop pretending it does. I found myself asking one final question, the one that had followed me since the day of the execution itself. Do you think General Voss knew, in her final moments, what her death would set in motion? Daniel was quiet for a long time before he answered, staring out at the stars through the relay station window. I think she knew exactly what it would set in motion, he said. I think that is why her last words were a warning rather than a plea. She spent her entire career holding the door shut with both hands. In the end, she wanted the people who forced it open to understand, at least for a moment before the consequences arrived, exactly what they were about to face. I left that meeting with a feeling I had never experienced in all my years serving the Concord Council, something between admiration and quiet dread. For 900 years, my people and dozens of others had treated humanity as a junior species, requiring careful management, a young civilization to be guided and contained for its own good, and for the comfort of everyone around it. We built an entire diplomatic order on that assumption, layer after layer of treaty and oversight and quiet control, and none of us stopped to ask what such a young species might actually be capable of, once it decided restraint no longer served its interests. The new treaty took effect gradually over the following months, and conquered space adjusted to a version of itself that no longer placed humanity beneath the older founding species. Grace Whitmore remained the senior human representative to the Council, and I watched her handle disputes with a directness that felt refreshing after decades of careful diplomatic phrasing designed mostly to avoid saying anything at all. She did not seek conflict, but she never once accepted a position of lesser standing either, and other delegations quickly learned that the old habit of testing human patience no longer produced the outcomes it once had. I think often about the lesson buried inside everything that happened that year, and I have shared it with younger council members whenever the topic arises during training sessions. We measured the leash the Thren placed on humanity by how tightly it appeared to hold, assuming a species that accepted limitation for 9 centuries had simply grown comfortable inside those limits. We never once measured it by what it was actually holding back, or by how quickly any civilization remembers exactly what it always could have been the moment nobody remains to ask it to stay smaller than it truly is. General Elena Voss died on a platform built by people who believed removing one patient negotiator would leave them facing a weaker, disorganized opponent. Instead, they discovered, within a matter of hours, that patience and weakness had never been the same thing at all, and that the peace they had enjoyed for 900 years had never depended on human limitation in the first place. It had depended entirely on human choice, exercised every single day by one person willing to keep the door shut with her own hands, long after anyone else would have simply let it fall open. I keep the full recording of that day archived in my personal records, unedited from beginning to end. I do not keep it out of any fascination with what happened. I keep it as a reminder, one I return to whenever I find myself assuming that patience in others means permission for myself. Some doors stay shut for reasons that have nothing to do with weakness on either side, and the moment someone finally breaks one open, they often learn far too late exactly what they were protecting themselves from the whole time.